Okay. This is going to be Taylor Caldwell's on Growing Up Tough, her autobiography. And the first time I recorded it, I was still in college. So Lord knows, that was a long time ago. I didn't get out till 04. So I talked about making copies of it and leaving it around campus for people to pick up. So that was before 04, I know. But it's going to be a little tinny because I didn't have a very good recording quality at the time, so you'll just have to put up with that. Okay. It'll ever come on.
I have in my hands a New American, a noted conservative magazine, and in it there's an article by Taylor Caldwell, who is now dead. She fought the socialists called liberals for many, many years, and she's explaining why she became a conservative. And the title is Meet the Liberal Mr. and Mrs. Buttons. Underneath that it says, noted author Taylor Caldwell tells of her childhood encounters with the thriftiness, that's in quotes, quote, thriftiness, of liberals and how these experiences turned her into a grim conservative. Her words, grim conservative. Recently, a flowery young liberal male with flowing hair and flowing hands and a flowing tongue too demanded of me that I explain why and when I became a conservative. He wanted to know how I got this way. Frankly, I couldn't remember just how and when, and I went home musing to myself. I searched my memory, and soon it all began to click in my mind, episode after episode, all of them very painful one way or another. There are doubtless 100 psychiatrists around who will find the following recounting of those formative experiences very interesting. Number 1, Heart for the Poor. It all began, doctors, when I was a child. A quote, liberal aunt of mine, who had never herself been in need of anything material, had a deep passion for the poor, for whom she was very careful to keep far away, of course. While we still lived in England, where I was born, Auntie would frequently gather together outworn garments, which her family had discarded, and prepare them for the Women's Guild of our local Anglican church. She would sit before the fireplace, I recall, and singing some sad Scots or Irish ballad in a very moving soprano, she would carefully snip every single solitary button off the clothing. Now this is clothing for the poor, keep this in mind. I was very young indeed when this practice of Auntie's suddenly seemed outrageous to me. Auntie, I demanded, what will the poor do for buttons? Auntie had very remarkable hazel and glittering eyes, and they usually glittered on me unpleasantly, and they did so now. They can buy them, she snapped. They're only 2pence a card. I pondered. If people were so poor that they had to wear other people's cast-offs then they certainly were too poor to buy buttons. I pointed this out to Auntie. She smacked me fiercely for my trouble and began to shriek. A wicked, wicked girl, screamed Auntie. She has no heart for the poor. My uncle, hearing Auntie's shrill cries, stormed out of his studio and demanded to know what was the matter. Auntie pointed a shaking, furious finger at me. Your niece, she said, doesn't want me to give these clothes, these poor old worthless rags, to the poor. I was standing up now, having recovered from Auntie's blow. If they're rags, I said reasonably, why should the poor want them anyway? And she's taken off all the buttons. Impudence, bellowed Uncle, who, like Auntie, was a flaming liberal, and also very fond of making a great show of loving the poor, whom he had never met. And he grabbed me and soundly thrashed me on the spot. I'm afraid I didn't ardently love those relatives after that, which was sinful, of course. But from that day on, buttons had a special significance for me. I noticed that other of my liberal relatives removed buttons from the garments they were preparing for the poor, though I never discovered them patching those same garments. One rich relative did answer my cynical question about the button snipping with the brief reply, "It's thrifty, and I suppose, Janet, that's something you'll never be." I made a point of learning all about thrift, and the lessons were all about me, too, and it never appealed to me thereafter. Thrift is an estimable virtue, I have heard, but somehow when I encounter thrifty liberals, and they are inevitably tight with their own money, I always seem to see those buttons being snipped off the clothing for the poor. I often think of the old little poem written by some Englishman who ought to be immortalized. "To spread the wealth the communist's willing, he'll tax your pennies and keep his shilling."